Hey everyone, I hope all of you are doing well and welcome back to Kayan Al-Bashar, where today I have kind of a massive build for you guys, because I built a Roman theater for the Bengal Tigers. Now I do realize that another creator built a Roman theater for his lions, and it is inspired by his creation, so after this video is done, do check him out because it's an amazing build. But I do think that my theater is... well, let's just say my theater has an actual stage and it's bigger. So bigger always equals better. Don't take that out of context, but my theater is just bigger. And also this, for some reason, I know it shouldn't, but it just beefed me a little bit. Because Yoder in his build, or in his video, called his build a amphitheater. And I could be wrong on this, so please correct me if I am, but an amphitheater is the whole circle, it's like the Colosseum, while his build is half a circle, so then it should be called a theater. Although I do realize that for like naming it a Roman amphitheater is a little bit more like a well-known thing, while a Roman theater is a little bit left to the side. Probably should call your build a Roman theater, because that's, I think, what it actually is. And also for some reason I felt like I needed to defend something, because I built an entire Greek park in Planet Coaster. Sadly that project has been abandoned since Planet Zoo came out, but for some reason I still felt like I for some reason needed to defend something. Don't know what, but I needed to defend something. And by this point you probably will realize that Greek and Roman architecture is kind of my passion. It's the architecture style that I like building in the most. So yeah, I think that's what... no, that's not what I needed to defend. It's kind of... I don't know. I needed to defend something. Mostly that, yeah, it's a Roman theater, not an amphitheater. Or at least that's what it is to my knowledge. But anyway, so back to what I built. So as I said, my theater has an actual stage. Also, just a quick note, it's bigger. But my theater has a stage, which means there's actually a lot more verticality to the build, because the stage adds a lot of verticality. And that's the reason why I needed Bengal Tigers instead of lions. Or at least I wanted Bengal Tigers instead of lions. Because tigers just seem more like climbers to me. Maybe lions are also good climbers, but tigers just seem like better climbers to me. So, because the stage adds a lot of verticality and I wanted the animal to make actual use of that, is the reason why I added Bengal Tigers. Also, later on I will actually screw up that verticality, because I did not realize that... well, I built beams to make sure that the Bengal Tigers can get up the stage. And then I tried to make them into ladders, and then did not realize that that actually just screwed up the climbing thing, so they couldn't climb up stage. One side of the stage has a ladder, the other side just has beams going up, because the Bengal Tiger can't use a ladder. In a way, screwed it up later on, but one side actually still works for the Bengal Tigers. And now you can actually see a little bit of like the verticality being built. Well, the stands are obviously the main thing to remember when it comes to Roman theater. But then the actual stage is usually like the real work of art. Which sadly makes it even more sad that most of the time the stands sort of survive. But then the stage, because it's a loose building, it usually is very deteriorated or is almost not even there anymore. So this actually makes up the story actually of this theater, because it is going to be completely complete. I could not bear it to actually destroy this theater, because again, Roman and Greek architecture is kind of my passion, and I just hate to make ruined buildings, or at least make an entire building and then ruin it. So the story that I went for, which is actually kind of a normal story, actually also in real life, is that because this theater is kind of incorporated into the palace. It is kept intact by the Sultan because he still uses it as his own personal theater, or at least like the theater of the court. This is actually kind of a, well, normal thing also in real life when it comes to like, well, keeping up with Roman buildings or like just ancient buildings. Because, sad thing, but we humans really just don't care about buildings, or at least care less about buildings when we can't use them. So most Roman temples of course are in ruins, but the ones that usually aren't in ruins, or at least the ones that I know from my visit to Rome, the ones that aren't in ruins usually were changed into churches. So the ones that were or are in decent state still today is mostly because we still use them, and the ones that we weren't using were usually sadly left to rot. Also, I call this us humans, but then I'm a squirrel, so do I count as human? Half, maybe? Well, I will later say something that makes me even more of a squirrel. But yeah, it's in a way sad that most things that, well, from ancient times that survived is either because they were found later on, such as like Pompeii. Yeah, most things that survived is only because they were still useful, or at least were still seen as useful. I mean, the Pantheon, I think that's correct because I usually mistake the Parthenon and the Pantheon. Parthenon is the one in Athens, if I'm correct, and the Pantheon is the one in Rome. I for some reason always mix up those names, but I think the Pantheon is like a shining example of this because it is in, I would say, almost completely pristine condition because the ancient statues were removed, like the ancient statues of the Roman gods were removed from that place, but it's still intact because it changed into a church. In a way sad when you think about it, but also in a way happy because, well, because of that function change, we can still see those buildings as they could be or maybe were in Roman times. So yeah, sad note, but now let's go to a more positive note. So the Bengal Tigers love this habitat, but I needed to make sure because I have a little bit of like a past with the Bengal Tigers in Plant Zoo because in the beta they would just not stop jumping at the guests, even though there was like a 5-meter glass wall in between them. They would not stop jumping at the guests, so, well, let's just say I needed to make sure that the Bengal Tigers wouldn't get off stage or go into the stands and then jump over the stands and then just start mauling the public. So yeah, needed to make sure that there was an actual fence in there, but then also needed to make sure that the fence wasn't obstructing the view. This is basically what I'm doing right now, trying to make sure that the Bengal Tigers don't escape. They can actually move all around these stands, which I was kind of surprised by because most of the times when I build something, well, first of all, I don't care about the animals while I'm building it, and most of the time areas that I thought would be accessible aren't, so kind of surprising that they can walk all over these stands. They can get real close to you, really close to you. Also, I want to quickly note that, well, I'm just going to say this is the most perfect theater ever, but I also later on built 4 floating planters with waterfalls coming out of them behind the stands. I mean, noise is never really an issue with theater, right? Yeah, there are 4 waterfalls right behind the stands. Well, you should already scream when you're on stage, so now you just have to scream a little bit harder to get above the sound of the waterfalls behind stage, or behind the stands. I continuously just say stage or stands interchangeably, so have fun decoding what I mean. But yeah, here I actually built those ladders that, well, one of them is a ladder, the other one isn't, but here is the point where I screwed up and made the actual upper balcony area inaccessible to the tigers. So one side still has that ladder, the other side doesn't, but the sleeping area is actually in this upper area for the Bengal tigers, so that they actually use the entire building, because if I just put in a beam to the upper area and don't put anything in that upper area, they would not go up there. Also, their water is there, so they don't only sleep there, but they also drink there. And yes, it is that, well, what is it, that pump thing, because that's the most reliable water source in Planet Zoo. And I don't really care too much about the keepers, because sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. But when it comes to water, usually the animals have to die of dehydration before they fill those things. Yeah, I did not want to take that risk. And the theater, or at least the stage, is modeled after a lot of Roman theaters. Sadly, again, most of those theaters are in ruins because most of them weren't really used. Also, again, it's a Roman theater, not an amphitheater, because a Roman amphitheater is fully round and like the Colosseum. Yeah, that's... Don't call Roman theater a amphitheater or call a Roman amphitheater a theater in my vicinity, because... Well, actually not even in my vicinity. If you call it a Roman amphitheater and it is actually a Roman theater, I will just pop out of thin air and just start scrutinizing you. Just, you know, just heavily frowning at you. Won't do anything actually, because I'm too lazy to do that. And also you can, well, just throw me some, probably just some string. I'm very easily distracted. I mean, it's part of the reason why I call myself a squirrel. But then in some cases I just don't stop concentrating on something, which is actually the majority of this build. And the majority of this build is actually not what you guys see, because the majority of this build is placing 1,000,000 flowers. Whenever I place flowers for some reason, I get really into it, even though it's like 3 hours of work, because most of the gardens of the royal palace have just an insane amount of flowers, because I wanted it to be very colorful and very like garden-like, so that means a lot of flowers to me for some reason. But yeah, I don't know how I managed to place so many flowers. They are at the sides of the stage, on the back of the stage, also at the entrance to the theater. Because again, this theater is still in use by the Sultan and the royal court. Yeah, a lot of flowers, so... Another reason why I call myself a squirrel. I focus on the weirdest of drinks and then just forget time exists. But then I also sometimes get very easily distracted and just start building over there. I don't know where over there is, but just somewhere. Literally just a little hill can distract me. For some reason, when it comes to placing flowers, I'm just in Zen mode for some reason. I am going to traumatize myself one time, or make myself go insane by placing all those flowers. But I actually, this is in a way sad, but I actually had another build, or at least another version of the gallery that I built right now, which was actually following the shape of the theater. It was a round building. And it also was around 20,000 pieces. So yeah, I got flashbacks of the station of 200,000 pieces that I built in the previous version of Kayan Al-Bashar. But instead I changed it to this more, well, just rectangular kind of gallery. Just because it fit in more with the rest of the palace. And also the round gallery just looked very strange. So yeah, in a way sad, because the pillars and arches that I now use, I sadly did not get on screen. Or at least I could, but it would be a little bit of a messed up video if I did. So yeah, let's just say sadly that part of the build isn't in the video, but then great, because this part is actually how it ended up. So this is also just quickly to note, if I'm correct, I am going to probably mispronounce your name, maybe also going to say your name incorrectly, but Sani, or Sani, I think that was your name, but then I have the mind or the memory of a goldfish sometimes. I'm actually very curious, how many videos have I actually started talking about the same subject twice? Because I do realize that I sometimes have done that probably. But Sani said something similar to like how easy it looks in a speed build, but then I also have the magic of editing on my side, so what you see is sped up and I cut out where it goes wrong. And this actually brings me also to the first renovation build that's probably going to go up next week. It's a frontier build. I'm actually going to ask you guys to guess which build it is, because everybody has probably seen this build and deleted it. So that's going to rule out some builds, but what build do you think I have renovated? But that build actually had, well, 3 incarnations. The last one I went with because I was literally just so, well, in a way done with the build for a little bit. But it also was like the best iteration, of course, but yeah, there's a lot of things that you guys don't see. Primarily placing a million flowers. I am going to show you those, well, floating planters with waterfalls coming out of them. Again, they are referenced from Guild Wars Nightfall and Guild Wars 2, so also if there are any Guild Wars 2 or Guild Wars Nightfall, or well, basically just Guild Wars 2 and Guild Wars players, say hey. Yeah, I'd actually never really meet other people who actually play that game. Even though it's kind of a big game, but I never really meet anyone playing that game. Although then I also haven't really played it for at least half a year. But this build is, or at least the thing that I'm building right now, is inspired or referenced from the region of Abbey in Guild Wars 2 and Guild Wars. Or at least in certain expansion packs of those games. But yeah, this is just going to give great acoustics or just great sound for the theater, because having waterfalls in the background always makes it better. But then, yeah, it's kind of just like magic, so maybe the local vizier or just Shaik or someone has placed like a magic spell on the theater, making acoustics and such great, even though there are floating waterfalls behind them. Yeah, I don't really care about realism anymore, I think. But yeah, I just wanted to have this just to create that more fantasy vibe, and also to bring in some more elements of that floating part of Kayan Al-Bashar. Even though the entire zoo floats, or at least by now most of the zoo floats, the floating part is a little bit somewhat understated in some areas, so I just wanted to bring that back. And then I sometimes just see a floating ship in the background, and then I'm thinking like, do I need to bring it back? There's literally a floating ship in the background. But yeah, let's just say I really like adding these things, because it just makes it a little bit more fantasy-like, having just floating or flying planters around. And I also still just love Guild Wars 2, primarily that region of Vabi in the, well, it's in both expansions. But yeah, I just really love this build. It's also one of the biggest builds so far, or at least in the palace. So we had a kind of smaller build with the courtyard entrance, but then we have a huge build right next to it. I also built a small wall next to the actual theater, because that's, well, the theater is actually at the end, or at like the border of the actual palace, and it sort of goes into the palace gardens. But that wall is mostly there to just define where the palace ends. And it's also a little bit realistically, when you're like looking at Topkapi Palace and the Alhambra, they are both, well, fortified. The Alhambra is also just a castle, but then Topkapi Palace also has or had walls. Yeah, sometimes grammar just escapes me, but let's move on. So yeah, here are the floating waterfalls, or the floating planters with waterfalls coming out of them, because I don't care about realism, and well, I mean, this video is, or this build is probably already the worst for people with like stage anxiety or stage fright, so yeah, let's just say this probably makes it a little bit less because you can't hear the public over the waterfalls probably. Probably also can't hear yourself because waterfalls are loud. But anyway, that's actually most of it for today's build because as I said previously, I'm not going to show you guys placing those million flowers. I'm only going to do a little bit of a start of it just to show you guys kind of what I went for. So there are planters on ground as well, but then they don't really, well, they are not really necessary because as you can see, I went way beyond that. Also, most of this habitat is actually a jungle because, surprise, the Bengal Tigers actually want more plants than, well, any other animal so far. Actually, this is never really the case with me, but most of the time, this is really a correct sentence now that I think about it, but most of the time my animals want less plants, because I just go overboard with the plants. The Bengal Tigers barely have enough, so that was fun to experience. But anyway, that's actually going to be it for today's video mostly, so if there are any Gold Rush players out there watching this, hey, and also, what kind of building do you think I am renovating? So what frontier build is there that I think all of you have seen, but all of you have probably deleted at one point or another. But that's going to be it. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you do, I hope to see you back in the next one. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button if you want to see more, or just like to do that. Like, if you just like to click buttons, then go at it, and just have an amazing day. Do stay safe and take care of yourselves, especially during these times, and just have an amazing day. Again, if you want to click buttons, do that. Bye bye.